Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Royal Geographical Society. My name's Catherine Stanyland, I'm Director of NLA, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all here for the first NLA Murray Lecture. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Peter Murray.
Well, good evening, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank Nick McKeough and NLA for laying this evening on. It's a great honour for me to do this, but also, as Catherine said, I hope it's a part of a tradition which will give life to the debate about the city, which is just so important and something we do rather well in London. And the title does have a question mark, and so we need to look at what things are good and what things are not so good. And I was brought up in the country, and this is Farmer Newman leading his cattle along Laycock High Street. But I tried to get out of there as soon as I could, and got to London in 1964 to complete my course at the Architectural Association. And I have to say, London was so exciting. It felt supercharged, particularly compared to the country, but it was then, this is the Archigram Group, and this is one of their magazines which looked at the future of cities, and the Archigram Group were the Beatles of architecture at the time. But also, of course, in London there were the theatres, the discourse, the galleries, the parties, and Swinging London was in full swing, and it was an amazing time. And the world looked to London for its fashion, its music, and its culture. And the interesting thing is that it did so in spite of the fact that the place itself felt run down and rather grey. It was, after all, only 20 years, really, since the end of World War II. The buses and tubes were unreliable, streets were jammed and polluted. The GLC wanted to demolish swathes of the city for new motorways. The population was falling. People were being sucked out of London by the New Towns policy. Yet, even though the population was falling, there was a housing problem. Lots of buildings left empty were brought into use by squatters. The boroughs and the GLC oversaw large-scale construction of council housing, often in the form of high-rise flats, at least until Ronan Point collapsed in 1967. So the environment was not great, but the place was very exciting. Although I did enjoy London, but as a student, tended to look to the US, to the architecture of Louis Kahn, Saarinen, Rudolph, and Buckminster Fuller. And also we looked to the technological excitement of the NASA space program, which was delivering so much new technology, new thinking about technology to the world. And Rayner Banham was very much our mentor, or my mentor, one of my mentors at the time, and this book, Los Angeles, The Architecture of Four Ecologies, was something that tempted a lot of us to go to the West Coast to have a look round, and LA's low-rise sprawl had not yet run foul of the environment lobby. And indeed, the Milton Keynes master plan celebrated it and was based on it. And then the London plan, 40 years later, of course, was its antithesis. So at that time, it was hard to see London as the greatest city. In the 19th century, probably it was, but in the 20th, not so sure. But I changed my mind a few years later when I heard Simon Thurley, then CEO of English Heritage, describing London as the greatest city, but in the context of history as well as in the context of its global role. But it was also soon after the publication of London, a biography by Peter Ackroyd. And this is Peter at the London Architecture Biennale in 2004, where the whole idea of driving a herd of cows down St. John Street was very much inspired by London, a biography to teach people and show them why streets were created as they were. Ackroyd, of course, in his book treats the city as a living entity, intertwining past and present, revealing the reasons for its resilience over time and its amazing facility for transformation. Ackroyd explains London's unique character and its variety, why every street tells a story in contrast to the uniformity of, say, Paris, and its organic and untidy growth that is the counterpoint of the gridded cities of the US, a contrast exemplified in the difference in form between the skewed city and the orthogonal Canary Wharf. Boris Johnson, in his 2013 boosterish mayoral report, used as the title, the 2020 vision, the greatest city on earth. And of course, in that, he made much of how the capital contributed 22% of UK national output and how investment in London can drive the rest of the UK economy. A comment in stark contrast to the levelling London down policies he pursued as Prime Minister. What a scumbag. And it's worth just saying here, actually, that London's fiscal transfer to the rest of the country last year rose to a massive 38 billion. And let's hope the next government remembers that. So what is it that is so great about London? Well, first of all, look at all the global rankings, of which there are many which come out during the year, and I picked up some of them. In most of them, New York and London vie for the top slot. So the Global Power City Index by the Murray Memorial Foundation ranked London as top city, driven by its cultural attractions, international airline network, and its accessibility. The Oxford Economic Global Cities Index aggregates economics, human capital, quality of life, environment, and governance to create an overall score for each city. And so London is edging up onto New York, but it's the scale of its economy, I think one can see, understandably, we don't quite make the 100%. And then human capital, we come out on top because we have the most globally ranked universities of any city in the world and nearly the most global corporate headquarters as well. Residence Cities Best Cities report has ranked London as the best city for the 9th consecutive year and as a global capital for culture, finance, and education. And it says, London still reigns over all global cities. Despite crippling COVID lockdowns and economic devastation, despite Brexit, despite war in Europe, the city is more indomitable and part of the global discourse than ever. But it does mark London down on environment and quality of life. So, it's pretty shocking, really, that 197th place for environment and 292nd for quality of life. I think that's pretty damning, really, and something we need to do something about. In 2017, NLA published London Design Capital, which confirmed London's role as the world's global capital for creative design and construction skills. The capital has benefited, as it has in financial services, from its history, its location, its legal education system, to create a real hub. And that hub of built environment skills that are in demand around the world mean that it is the first city to have converted the exporting of professional skills in our industry into a truly global business. And I'm pleased to say that 7 years later, post-COVID, London is still the global hub for architecture. And figures just published by the RABA and the Architects Company show that a third of the world's top 100 architectural practices have either a branch or their HQ in London. 87% of the UK's international earnings from architectural services is generated by London-based UK practices. The value of these international earnings has increased by a stunning 43% over the past 2 years. And that's primarily from additional workload from Europe and North America. So London architects' workload and workforce is far more international than any other city in the world, even after Brexit. We are clearly the best in quite a few of the areas that a city is concerned with, but as we saw, we fail in quality of life and environment. And of course, those are sectors that so we should be having an impact, and we should face up to the stuff we're doing still needs a bit more work. Because it's not actually for want of trying. The first London plan actually did set out to address these issues: sustainable development, affordable homes, healthy living, environmental health, green spaces, and public realm improvements. And it set out a pretty clear and sustainable structure to do so. And central to the plan is that development for London takes place within the boundaries of the Greater London area. And for this clarity of vision, we must thank the late Lord Richard Rogers, whose ideas about the sustainable compact city were set out in his book, Cities for a Small Planet. These were central to the policies of the Blair government via the Urban Task Force, and then to Ken Livingstone when he commissioned Rogers to become his architectural advisor, heading up the Architecture and Urbanism Unit. And the key to this policy was the densification of brownfield sites accessed by good public transport. The results can be seen easily today on the NLA's London model at the London Centre. The low-rise city remains across the majority of the capital, but spread across the model, you can see very easily the eruptions of density and taller buildings in the opportunity areas of places like Stratford, North Greenwich, White City, Nine Elms, et al. The skyline may have changed, but the character of the majority of the existing city has not. So as well as accommodating London's growth within its boundaries, the first London plan aimed to make London a better city to live in, a more attractive, well-designed and green city, and a more prosperous city, promoting social inclusion and accessibility. One of the first exhibitions we put on at the NLA was Civilizing Spaces. And that focused on Ken Livingstone's plan to deliver 100 new public spaces during his mayoralty. And the Architecture and Urbanism Unit at the time, I'm glad to see Ricky Burdett is here, collaborated closely with TfL to develop public realm strategy, which grew out of Rogers' plans, shown at the Royal Academy in the Foster Rogers Sterling exhibition of 1986, which I curated with Dejan Sujic, and illustrated a pedestrian-friendly environment in Trafalgar Square, you see here, Parliament Square, and also along the Victoria Embankment. At that time, there were few good examples to emulate in London. Public space had not been something we'd thought about. A lot of planners thought the weather was far too wet and cold for people to sit out and enjoy themselves. And the best example, I think, at the time was Broadgate, Stuart Lipton's Broadgate, which took a place-based approach and broke the mold for property development in the UK. The spaces between the buildings were as important as the buildings themselves. And research by Space Syntax showed that city workers would walk regularly for up to 5 minutes from their normal locations to eat their lunch in the traffic-free spaces of Broadgate. And if you go there at a weekend, even today, it is the most crowded part of the city as people enjoy the spaces created there. So although not very many of Ken's spaces were completed during his period as mayor, the die was cast and public space became central to regeneration projects and new development across the capital. And we have seen some magnificent changes take place in our attitude to public space, of which I always think that King's Cross is probably the most significant and perhaps the most influential. But we have recently seen a number of great street improvements too. And this is Alfred Place, which is outside the building centre where NLA was located until 2019. And this was a rather grotty delivery street, which is now a park. And it's a wonderful transformation. The changes at Aldwych and Aldgate here are equally transformational to the quality of life for people working and living in those areas. And until last month, the improvements at Bank Junction in the City of London were going in the same direction, with plans to turn the deadly crossroads into a safer place for the future and to create a sense of place. And the changes, and here you can see these large areas of new pavement where people can walk safely and enjoyably. It aligned with the city transport strategy that prioritized the needs of people walking, made streets more accessible, and delivered world-class public realm. It made the most efficient and effective use of street space by significantly reducing motor traffic with a Vision Zero policy on death and serious injuries, and enabled more people to choose to cycle by making conditions safer and more pleasant. And also, you've only got to go there at rush hour to see how much more comfortable people are, pedestrians are, walking, crossing the roads than the rather desperate situation that was there before. So all through traffic was stopped by the corporation, apart from bicycles and buses, and they were kept out during the day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But recently, the Court of Common Council agreed to allow black cabs back into the junction during daytime. And that will have some serious consequences, both in terms of safety, in terms of bus times. But most importantly, it's a sort of backward step. It's the thin end of the wedge in giving support to those who would turn the clock back. How many more of the city's commendable policies on safety, public space, equity, and sustainability are they going to overturn? And also, what impact might it have on the future of the square mile? I mean, it's still recovering from COVID. It has some very positive policies around Destination City about bringing visitors back into the square mile to make up for the absent workers. But what the Court of Common Council didn't seem to realise was that what will attract people back into the city in the future are delightful places, not traffic-filled streets. And what will attract people back into the city is not a policy that placates the 2% of people that use black cabs, but one that focuses on the 98% who use buses, the underground, walk and cycle. And even the city's own Plan 2040 calls for better equity, calls for a place that promotes equity, diversity, social inclusion, and in the design and use of buildings and public spaces. So that is really a backward step, which I think ignores, but I mean, a lot of the debate was about you can't hail a cab within 50 meters of Bank Junction. Now, the city needs to attract young global talent. How many of those will want to hail a cab, or have ever hailed a cab, or will ever hail a cab? They have other ways of getting in touch with cabs. And as I think Bloomberg City Lab writer Fergus O'Sullivan concluded in an article on the city's decision, allowing taxis across the area may tarnish the City of London's carefully built image as a place looking towards a greener and cleaner future. Quite. I agree with his comments absolutely. And I think also improvements like Bank are essential if we are to meet the Mayor's London Plan target of 80% of journeys by active travel by 2041. And active travel is critical to reducing pollution, driving sustainability, and creating healthier streets for London. And I think we need to put that all in the context of the fact that we are fast moving towards the next tectonic shift in the travel infrastructure of London. So in the 19th century, we ripped through the fabric of areas like Paddington, King's Cross, and Waterloo to create the rail network. In the 20th century, we gave over our streets to the motor car. In the 21st century, we have big choices to make. Do we use the various technologies at our disposal to replicate the mistakes of the past? Or can we plan for and deliver a city where streets are for people, are not life-threatening, and provide mobility services that are efficient and sustainable? London is making progress in delivering this third phase, but I think politicians must clarify the direction of travel as a way of improving our cities rather than just describing it as a war on cars. What the sort of discussion that we had at Bank Junction was when you said you need better conditions for cyclists, people said, oh, well, what about all the cyclists who go through red lights? What about all those line bikes lying on the pavement? Absolutely right, those are things that need to change, but they're not something that needs to change the basic argument. And I rather like Singapore's talk about a car-light society and their speedy shift to mobility as a service and reducing the significance of the individual car. And of course, I mean, we did pretty well with the congestion charge back in 2003, and that reduced car usage in central London, although the space has since been filled by private hire vehicles and internet sales delivery vans. But along with that, approximately 25% of road space in inner London has been reallocated to walking, cycling, and public transport over the last 15 years. And we're seeing major changes to car-oriented infrastructure of the 1970s in places in central London, like getting rid of the gyratories in Piccadilly, Pall Mall, Baker Street, Gloucester Place, Tottenham Court Road, Gower Street, and Aldgate. Those, I think, have been great improvements to the quality of experience of those areas. Yet, while the policies are clear, the changes are hard fought. Even Christopher Hayward, who's the chairman of the City Planning and Transportation Committee, when he did support the continued restrictions on taxis at Bank, he required a 24-hour police protection after death threats from angry cab drivers. But cycling, I'm glad to say, is becoming increasingly popular in London, and Will Norman, Commissioner for Cycling and Walking, announced recently that London's network of cycleways has quadrupled since 2016, and there are now 1.26 million cycle trips every day on average. But there is potential for much more. And the Mayor is continuing to roll out more cycleways and safer streets, but we do need to keep up with other cities. Barcelona has a great project around its super blocks, which reclaim city streets for pedestrians and reduce through traffic. They're a sort of more sophisticated version of our low traffic neighborhoods, and they have a 10-kilometre speed limit, which allows vehicles to mix much more easily with pedestrians in the smaller areas within the larger superblock. And New York has continued to expand and enhance its cycling infrastructure and public spaces, and this progress builds upon the foundations laid during the Bloomberg era through the work of Transport Commissioner Jeanette Sadiq-Khan. And under Mayors de Blasio and Adams, cycling infrastructure has been seen substantial growth, Over 430 miles of bike lanes been added since 2007, contributing to a 72% decrease in the risk of serious injury for cyclists. The New York City Plaza program has transformed underused streets into pedestrian areas, with over 70 plazas currently open and more in the pipeline. And then in Seoul, wonderful transformation where they demolished the motorway on the left to allow for the restoration of the Cheonggi-cheong stream and created a new park that you see there instead. And of course, in San Francisco, some time ago, the Embarcadero Freeway Removal Project revitalized the area, improved quality of life, and reconnected communities with the waterfront. And inside that now is a really, really busy community marketplace, cafes, and you can see in the picture on the top left, it was just hidden behind a dual-level freeway. And in Singapore, they have introduced a network of connectors for cycling and walking from park to park, coast to coast. The aim is to have every household within a 10-minute walk from a park by 2030, and then 90% of the way there today. And we're not doing anything like as well as Paris. Mayor Anne Hidalgo has halved the car parking spaces in Paris to create greener, healthier places. In the heart of the city, around Notre Dame and City Hall, there's now a new city square, transforms that area. The Paris Plage urban beach is one of the most dramatic and popular transformation of any cities. And it reminds me of Stuart Lipton's comment at a workshop I attended on the progress of the Square Miles Destination City strategy. And so the chair asked Stuart, and he asked him, what did he think the city was lacking? And Stuart merely said, fun. Naysayers, I think, need to realize that these shifts are happening in civilized cities across the globe. And here we can see from Dublin to Bucharest, Rio de Janeiro to Lyon, Montreal, Santiago, these sorts of changes are happening as we speak. Now, of course, city centres have been impacted by workers staying away for 2 to 3 days a week, and they need to attract new audience. And creating better places is part of the way of doing it. But one would have thought that with all the fuss it is causing, that working from home was something new. Certainly, the scale of it exploded because of COVID, but the writing has been on the wall for quite a long time. And so, to put this conversation into some perspective, this is a project that I did when I was a student at the Architectural Association in 1965. 60 years ago, that is, it's a long time ago. So we were asked to redesign the Economist building in St. James. You can see the name Economist up the spire there. And that building had recently been completed by the Smithsons, was thought to be probably one of the best buildings of the time. But as an acolyte of Cedric Price, I didn't present a formal modernist solution like most of my colleagues, but one that was really generated by the way that journalists worked. And so this was the design of a building in a style which probably Prince Charles might have described as a kind of municipal fire station. But it was designed only to house admin. And journalists would be expected to work from home or on the hoof and send in their copy by phone or, in those days, fax. So you can see from my plan here, which I think is incredibly far-sighted, that most of the floor area was giving over to just the sort of social spaces which are recommended for offices today, and there's very little space for people to actually work. But Also, Frank Duffy was at the Architecture Association at the same time, and he was writing perhaps more seriously about this way back in the 1990s. And as I say, COVID accelerated that change, but perhaps we should have been a bit more prepared for it than we were. Because things are changing very fast at the moment, and there is this remarkable boom going on in the City of London at the moment of towers with some dozen or so in the pipeline. And this is explained by being the flight to quality. And that in the post-COVID era, occupiers are concerned about buildings which provide a combination of health and safety principles, technological needs, sustainability goals, evolving nature of work, and places that people want to go to and are encouraged to be in. And also, companies are looking to provide best possible environments for their employees to attract top talent and ensure long-term investment stability, all of which are best supported by a sort of grade A office space like this. But the interesting question to me, I think, is over the next few years, what is going to happen to all the second-hand space that these towers are sucking workers out of in 4 or 5 years' time? Will they find other uses? Will they become stranded assets? Or, as many probably will they be converted into homes? Because of all our intractable problems, probably affordable housing is the most tricky. And Labour have said that they're committed to constructing 1.5 million new homes over the next Parliament, with a particular emphasis on social and affordable housing, prioritising social rented homes to address the chronic shortage. Now, it's interesting that there have been policies of delivering affordable homes since we had an elected mayor, and it's interesting to compare our performance with other cities. Quite often when I'm sitting around we're talking to planners from cities like Toronto, they all deliver about half the targets that are set, and that's something that we've continued to do, and we just don't have enough of it. We've got 250,000 people on waiting lists in London, and so the capital needs this sort of major new funding to deliver those numbers. And we need to change the way that we actually look at housing. I mean, it should be seen as an essential piece of infrastructure which allows more integrated and comprehensive policy making, aligning housing policy with transport, education, healthcare services, and population growth. The fact that developers can't get electricity supplies in West London is scandalous. Now, the Centre for Economics and Business Research, CEBR, they found that, as this shows, 90,000 social homes per year would generate 51.2 billion net of economic and social benefits over 30 years. New social homes would generate savings on housing benefit, the NHS, universal credit, plus also the income from construction and the employment that would be generated by people living in the homes. So, I mean, that seemed to me a pretty convincing cost-benefit analysis. And with cost-benefit analysis like that, it's a no-brainer, it seems to me, for government to invest in social housing and stop spending the billions they're paying on housing benefit. To deliver numbers, the government must also beef up the ability of local authorities to provide social housing at scale, to help also contribute to economic growth and to help meet the 2050 net zero target. Now, I like very much the model of Be First, Barking and Dagenham's regeneration delivery company. And I had the honour of working on the board as a non-exec with the late Lord Bob Kerslake when he was chairman. And Pat Hayes was the chief executive. The company has built an enviable reputation for delivery and quality of design. and since 2021 has secured planning permission for over 6,000 homes and 300,000 square meters of industrial space. And its planning department, under Caroline Harper, is the top performing of any local authority in the country. And Caroline describes the culture of Be First, the business acumen of the private sector, the ethos of the public sector, and the vitality of the voluntary sector. So I think we need a bit more of that. And in this current economic climate, partnership with the private sector is imperative, and I'm very pleased to see the impact that the NLA and London and Partners initiative, Opportunity London, is having in promoting and encouraging investment in London and its boroughs. Now, the development of new homes in the first London plan by Richard Rogers, as I mentioned, that was focused very much on brownfield sites. But today, we need to find more space. We need more infill, and we need to densify suburban areas. Now, Croydon produced a splendid guide, a supplementary planning document on the subject, and that led to a surge of densification. So that was nearly 3 times the number of properties that they'd delivered in the 5 preceding years, and 3 times as many as Barnet, who are the next highest boroughs on the right-hand side. But unfortunately, resistance from local residents meant the policy was overturned by a new Tory mayor who was elected on an anti-development ticket. And even greater resistance can usually be found in any discussion about development and the Green Belt. And 10 years ago, a group of us rescued the London Society from extinction. And one of the main reasons for trying to save it was that it had been very important in planning over the last century and had been central to the creation of the Green Belt in the 1930s. And that was initially conceived by the Society as a narrow belt of land for health and recreational purposes and to stop sprawl. And no one then imagined that it would extend to the 35-mile deep exclusion zone that we have now. So the Society always supported the idea of a detailed review of the Green Belt. And I think the Labour Party's plan to look at development on grey belt land is to be welcomed. But on top of that, I look at the excellent work by Russell Curtis of RCKA on golf courses. Now, this is the sort of imaginative research that I think we need to make the most efficient and equitable use of land in the capital. So London's got 95 golf courses, and they cover an area larger than Brent. And 40% of those are owned by local councils. So what can you do about that? Now, Russell came up with one scheme, which I think is highly commendable. This is for a golf course owned by Enfield. It proposes new homes on a green landscape linked with new pedestrian routes which help knit the surrounding neighbourhood together, with new social infrastructure, retail uses, leisure activities, education, and zero-mile food production. But also, he could manage to fit in an 8-hole course as well. So this sort of use of publicly owned land to make a fairer distribution of publicly owned land, I think is well worth studying further. And of course, before anyone says, well, what about biodiversity if you get rid of these golf courses, that golf courses' intensive maintenance, of course, can actually harm local ecosystems, reduce biodiversity in the monocultural grass species which do not support diverse insect and plant life. So get rid of half the golf courses in London and you can build a lot of homes. The general way we plan, I think, is one of the secrets of London's success and the basis of its resilience. I don't mean the delays that happens in planning departments on but the overall view of the way our planning system is created. It reflects a characteristic, a sort of dislike of big fixed plans. It's, I think, typified by the rejection of Wren's post-fire master plan of the city, because the merchants wanted to get back to business rather than hang around while a master plan was created. And more up to date, it's the ability of the King's Cross plan to adapt to the changing marketplace as it was going through development. Our common law system, in contrast, say, to French civil law, allows the planning framework to evolve more dynamically in response to new challenges and new priorities. This means that planning law can more effectively respond to changing societal and commercial needs. The system's foundation on argument and discussion embodies democratic principles and seeks to ensure that planning decisions are transparent, inclusive, and balanced. I think that actually, if Wren's plan had been built, it would have created a straitjacket that would probably mean that the City of London would never have been able to become the economic powerhouse that it is today. But while our system does encourage debate and argument to make it properly democratic, we need better systems for wider involvement. I mean, it is actually very hard to get all but the most enthusiastic members of the community involved in consultation on local plans. And only when something is happening in their own backyard do most people, get involved in the system at all. We need to make local planning decision-making more open and more widely and sensibly debated. And this, of course, is at the heart of NLA's mission. But we deal with citywide issues. London also needs local urban rooms of the type which Terry Farrell described in his review of 2014. These, I think, should be part of local plans. They should be in high street locations and places where consultation, co-design workshops, presentations, and general community communications can take place. And also Design Southeast, another organization I like, and I was a trustee there for some time, and a trustee in a very tricky period, financial period, particularly following the demolition of CABE in 2010. And Design Southeast's excellent design reviewers and advisory panels have become a key part of the infrastructure of planning in the Southeast, focusing on how places work, not just what they look like. We need stronger voices to promote environmental improvements and quality of life. And I think that we need to have a city architect, as many cities do around the world. London needs a city architect, and I think London boroughs should have borough architects, creative, strategic thinkers and doers who inspire change, who seek to deliver better urban environments. Richard Rogers was de facto the city architect under Ken Livingstone, and his legacy runs deep. His role, and that of the Architecture and Urbanism Unit, was to promote high-quality architecture and urban design and create a culture that valued good design. And 2 decades later, many of the benefits are there for all to see. Sadiq Khan has mayoral design advocates, which I was honored to be one, and the advocates do a fine job in supporting the mayor's good growth agenda. But because there are 50 of them, they lack that sort of voice and clarity that Richard Rogers had, or indeed Peter Bishop, who followed him. Seoul and Brussels have city architects. Nathalie de Vries, who is the DV in Architects MRDV, she was formerly the city architect of Groningen. And that was a 2-day-a-week job. But to hear her present the issues of planning in Groningen was most clear, the greatest clarity of anyone I can think of, describing what the issues are of a particular city. Bridget Smythe, city architect of Sydney, has transformed the quality of commercial architecture in her city. And Finn Williams is a full-time city architect of Malmö in Sweden. And Finn, I'm sure many of you know him here. He set up public practice at the GLA before moving to Sweden and is now transforming that city's approach to architecture, seeking a place-based vernacular, addressing issues about how an increasing reliance on bioregional resources and the circular economy will change the way the city builds. How do architecture and planning need to respond to the effects of climate change on Malmö's flat coastal landscape? So I think we're at NLA particularly thrilled to see Finn's stunning progress, because we presented him with the first NLA RCA Year Prize for his thesis on place-based architecture and planning in East London in his final year at the Royal College of Art. So we felt we made a pretty good choice then to see his progress to date. We used to have lots of city architects until Mrs. Thatcher destroyed their departments. John Thorpe of Leeds was the last of the breed. He called himself a civic architect and stayed in post until 2012. And I think that drawing behind him just encapsulates to me the sorts of thinking that go into the debates that somebody of that stature can actually generate within a city. And of course, Liverpool today has a design champion in Paul Monaghan of HMM. So whether you call them design champions, a city architect, head of placemaking, chief urbanist, whatever you like to call them, cities do need a powerful voice that brings a high-profile, creative, holistic and strategic approach to urbanism. And it's a voice, I think, that London is currently lacking. To conclude, we in the built environment sector do have to take great responsibility for areas where we are currently underperforming in comparison to other cities. Livability, quality of daily life, well-being, housing and health and sustainability, and housing. And as part of NLA's mission for shaping a better city, we introduced the New London Agenda, a framework that sets the stage for equitable, sustainable, and prosperous city making. And you can see in the circle the values of taking responsibility, providing clarity, and building trust. And I think, these are things we must pursue with vigor as we reinvent the city in the post-COVID, post-global world. And of course, urban environments are in a perpetual state of becoming. They're shaped by social, economic, and technological changes. Our buildings need to adapt. The statement, "Long life, loose fit, low energy," by RIBA President Alex Gordon back in 1972, I think is one of the most important statements to have come out of that institution in the whole of my career. The key to London's resilience is its ability to adapt. It needs to change to changing circumstances. It has overcome pestilence, fire, bombs, and pandemics, and I'm sure will continue to hold its top spot amongst world cities. If in doubt, go to the south front of St. Paul's Cathedral and ponder on Christopher Wren's post-Great Fire inscription, "Resurgam, I will rise again, and again, and again, and again." And that's greatness. Thank you.